Hey Dev Team, welcome to Flutter with Drag. Today we're going to be having a look at creating this app over a couple of episodes it's going to take, which is a timer app for measuring the amount of time that you spend on work projects, things like that. Now, straight off the bat, I need to say this is not my design, and if you're going to try and use this design in any commercial or any production application, you absolutely have to get the permission of the designer. The link has been left below. We're just going to be using it for education purposes to see how we can take a design like this and lay it out within Flutter. Now, ordinarily, when you're working with a designer, they will provide you with a lot more information than we've got. We've just got this one picture. I do not know exactly what the font is or the font size is and whatnot. So our app is not going to be identical to this, but it's going to be fairly close. And that's what we need to do. So we'll come back to the design in a moment. Let's just get our basic blank app set up. So over to our code, and all I've done is installed a new Flutter project, which I've called Flutter Timer. This is absolutely the standard, but what I have done is I have added in an assets folder a profile picture, which I have downloaded off the internet. That is not me. And I have also added some fonts to the setup. And I have changed the pubspec.yaml file to deal with those. So I've set the assets I want in my application are everything in the assets folder. And I have set the fonts as follows, like that. And the only reason I've done that is that requires a recompiling of the app to get it going, which I've already done. And as you can see, the app is running. Okay, so we've got this initial setup. Let's take the My App widget and delete it. Gone. And we're just left with the run. And I'm going to change that. Instead of My App, I'm going to change it to Timer App. Now, if you're an absolute beginner with Flutter, you'll be able to follow along with this by copying what we're doing, but I'm not going to be explaining Flutter in depth in this particular set of videos. This is just for people really who have a little bit of knowledge, or people who want to learn as they follow along. But essentially, Flutter is made up of things that are called widgets. Okay. And we can create two types of widget. One is a stateful widget and one is a stateless widget. We will cover the differences later on. Essentially, stateless widgets are things that don't really change. That's not exactly true. But for now, we're going with a stateless widget and we're going to call it Timer App. So when our program starts, when the app starts, this function is called, and we run a widget called Timer App, which is now this one. As you can see, it is a stateless widget, and that returns some stuff. Okay, and at the moment it's returning a widget called a container. That's not what we want. To start with, we want to return a Material App widget. Now, Material App widget, if you hover over it, it shows you what it does, but it basically helps with a lot of the sort of the boilerplate stuff you need, things like routing, changing pages, stuff like that. So it does a lot of the heavy lifting and heavy work for us. A Material App takes in a number of different options, if you like. All of these things here. Now, we're not going to worry about too many of these just now, but one we are going to worry about just to help us along the way is one called Theme, and we're going to set a theme data, and we're going to set our font family to Poppins, which is the font that I've installed, and that will just mean all the fonts throughout the app unless I specify something different, will be the Poppins font. Also, on the top right hand side of our emulator, you can see that little debug banner. I'm just going to get rid of that by setting the debug show checked mode banner to false. Okay, now if we save that, we should end up with an absolutely blank app. We don't, we end up with an error, and the error is because originally this was running something called my app, and we've done that, we've got rid of that. So we're just going to reset that and do a restart of the app, and we get a working app that is blank. Okay, now a blank app is an app, but it doesn't do much, so it's a bit pointless. And so we're going to put in within our material app a home and a scaffold. And like material app, a scaffold is a widget that is pre-built that contains lots of stuff that we may make use of, or we certainly will be making use of, but it does a lot of boilerplate that we don't need to worry about. Okay, now a scaffold takes a body, and for now we're just going to take a text widget and put hello world. Save that, and there you go. There is our app with hello world. Now, as we go through the development of this app, I'm going to be using a number of keyboard shortcuts. I'm using VS Code, if you haven't noticed. That is available as free download, so you can get that set up and running. But using VS Code, we can hover over any of these widgets. We can right click and go to refactor, and there is a load of things we can do. We can wrap with another widget, wrap with some common widgets, extract stuff. We'll come over to all of those and see what most of these do at some other point. The essential thing is that you need to know how to access that. So it's right click, refactor, or the way I'm going to be doing it is while my cursor is over the widget, I'm on Windows, I'm going to be pushing Control Dot, and that will bring up that menu as well and allow us to do things. So for example, we can choose wrap with center, and you can see that that original text widget we had has now been wrapped inside a center widget, which when we save that gives us the text on the center of the screen. It centers whatever's in it. Okay, that's the basics done. Let's have a look at the design again and see if we can figure out what we're going to be doing. So this design is, initially we're just going to be looking at this blue and white area. We're not going to be looking at this background area in this episode. That will come at a future date. For now, we're going to be looking at this front one, and we can see that it's broken into two main sections. This area here, which I'm calling the header area, and this area down here, which I'm calling the menu area. Okay, so let's go back to our app, and we don't want the center text. That was just to make sure everything was working. I'm just going to delete that. But what I am going to put in is a column, because if you looked at our design, we had those two items, one above the other. The header is above the menu. They're in a column. And so we can use the column to specify some children. And the two children we're having, and we're just going to use text for now, is the header, and the second one is the menu. Those are our two areas, and when we save that, you can see in the emulator that we now have those two widgets, one below the other, which is exactly what we want. Okay, now the header needs to be bigger, and it also needs to be blue. So we're going to take our text widget for our header, and we're going to wrap it with a container. Okay, now a container is something that, as the name suggests, contains other things, but it also has various properties of its own. And one of the properties it has is we can set the color of the container, and we're going to set that to blue for now. Now, this isn't the proper blue. We'll have to change it later once we figure out what the proper blue is, but for now, that's fine. And you can see from our emulator that the text header is now on a blue background, but it's not taking up anywhere near as much space as our design. If we look at our design again, it takes up a much larger area. So first of all, we need to set the width of it, and we can do that with some numbers. Let's put in 300 and see how that goes. Well, that's almost the right width. It needs to be a little bit longer, and we can play around with those numbers to get it right. But the screen sizes, people's screen sizes differ, so we don't actually know what that number is. So a good way of setting the width to be the maximum is by setting the width to double infinity. And what that will do is it will set the width to be the maximum space it can take up. The height, on the other hand, we don't want it to be the maximum space. We want it to fit this content exactly. And that'll become easier once we actually have content in there. As we don't have any content, I'm just going to put 300 for now, which is going to drop that down almost halfway on my emulator. But we will be taking that out once we've got more stuff in there, once we've got the profile picture and all the other bits and bobs that we need to put in it. We will take the height out and it will fit to exactly what we need. Okay, so that's great. But we're going to now be putting more stuff in here. Instead of header, we're going to be having the picture, and we're going to be having the name and all that sort of stuff. And we don't really want to keep putting everything into this one page, into this one file. So what we can do, again using our refactor, is we can split things out. And I'm going to extract this widget, and I'm going to call it App Header. That might not be the best name. We may rename things later on. But what that's done for us is it's basically created a new widget called App Header. And it's created this new stateless widget for us down here. And that's going to be out of the way. Okay, that makes this area a lot easier to look at, and eventually we'll do the same for the menu. Now we could leave it there, but what we're going to do is we're going to move this into a file of its own. So I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this header.dart. Okay, and we're going to take our app header and we're going to cut it out of the main and paste it into the header.dart. Now we've got a load of errors. What are these errors? Well, these bits are widgets and information that are coming from somewhere, and we haven't told it where it's coming from. So with a control dot again, we can import where we're getting these from. We could import from widget, but we are going to import from material because it's going to contain other things that we need. Material.dart is basically the instructions of what all these pre-built widgets do for us. Okay, so that's got rid of the errors. And if we come back to the main.dart, you can see that had already been imported for us at the beginning. But now we have the error that this can't find app header because it's no longer in the same file. So we need to do the same, control.dot there, and we're going to say we're going to import the header, either will do, but I prefer to do these ones, from our app, which is called Flutter Timer, header.dart. And now it knows where to find that. It knows that this header is in that file. And so when we save that and our header, then our app is back to normal and running perfectly, and our header is separated off, and so we can now deal with our header separately. Okay, let's have a look at our design again. So the header itself is split into two different sections. We have this profile section here, and we have this timer section here. So that's the next thing we need to do. And we're going to do that in pretty much the same way that we did it in the main page between the header and the menu. And we're going to put that into a column itself. Okay, the column take children, and again, as we did before, we're going to have two children. We're going to have the profile area and the timer area. And if we look at that, you can see that the emulator has now done that for us. Great. Now, I am also going to take this profile area and look at it in a little bit more detail. So again, let's take this profile, and we can see that that itself is split into 4 different bits. We've got a picture, we've got the name, we've got what looks like a company name, and we've got an email address. And again, that's in another column. So where we have a profile, we're going to add another column which itself has a number of children, and that's going to be the picture, and it's got the 4 bits. Okay, so we've got the picture, we've got the name, we have a company name, and I'm just copying from the design here, Olaton Electronic. I don't even know if it's a real company or not. And oh, it's not electronic, it's electric. And we have an email address, which is the person's name. So I'll just copy and paste the name at yahoo.com and fix that up just so it matches the design. Okay, save that. Brilliant. So we've got all the elements there as per the design. But it doesn't look anything like the design. And one of the issues we've got is it's actually gone off behind the status bar, and we really could do without that happening. So one way we can do that is by putting the profile in something that's called a safe area. Now, we've got to decide where we're going to put the safe area, and the safe area basically works out for us where things are, like cameras and where buttons are on phones, and makes sure that our text doesn't appear or our elements don't appear behind it. We could put it at the top area here, but this isn't going to work for us. And the reason it's not going to work for us is it's now made sure that the whole of our background is not within a safe area. And the question is, do we want our blue to go behind the status bar? Well, we've got 2 ways of handling this. We could change the color of the status bar, or we could change it and allow this blue to go behind the status bar. And actually, the more I think about it, I think from a learning point of view, it'd be more interesting to change the color of the status bar. So we'll do that later, and we will leave our safe area as it is. Okay. But now we've got this column in here, which has our bits and bobs. And in our column, we have our second column, which has our profile stuff. And already it's starting to get confusing which column is which. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our profile bits and the column that we're in, and we're going to extract that to a new widget which we're going to call profile. Okay. And I'm going to create a new file. Now, the problem here is we've got a header file, and then we're going to create a profile file, and then we're going to create a timer file later on, and we're going to have lots of files all doing all sorts of stuff. So we're going to have a little bit of organization. If we look at our design, you'll see that the picture comes only, or this area here only comes a certain amount out. And the reason is, I think the designer intended for this to be what's called a sidebar, something that slides in and out. Now, we're not designing it like that just yet, but we will turn it into that later on. So for now, we're going to bear that in mind, and I'm going to create a folder called sidebar, lowercase s, and I'm going to move the header into the sidebar, and the Visual Studio is asking me, do I want to refactor it? I'm going to say yes, because that will fix all the paths and everything for me without having to go through and do everything. Okay, so within the sidebar we've got a header, and we're also going to create a new file, and we're going to call this profile.dart, and we're going to move our profile class from the header into the profile. Again, add our material import and import the profile into the header file. Okay, and now our profile is separate, but it's still there, and that's what we want. Okay, so let's get on with it, and this is this is where we get to the interesting part. We want to change this picture first of all to a picture, and as with a lot of things, there's a lot of different ways of doing it. We can take a widget that's already written for us called a circle avatar, and that will take a picture and put it in for us. But then there's issues around borders, not issues you can't overcome, but issues that are there. Now you can see from our design we're looking for a white border around the image. So what we're going to do is just use containers to create what we want. So we're going to put a container in, and within that child we're going to put the image. And because the image is an asset that we already have, we can just link to it by putting the path in like so. Save that, and nothing happens. Okay, there it is. Just a bit of a reload because we've changed some of the files around. Great. Okay, so that's just a little bit too big for what we want. So again, we can set a width, and because we want this to be a particular width, we can type in the size we want, and I went for 60. That's about right. Of course, you can change that as you see fit. Now, there's a couple of problems here, and one of the problems is it's a square image, and that's not what we're after. We want the image to be circular, and you can't take an image and make it circular. What we have to do is something called clipping it, and that is done by wrapping the image in another widget called a clip widget. Clip. And there's a load of different clips, but the one we want is the rect. The first R standing for round rectangle. Okay, so we're clipping with a round rectangle. Okay, so what does that do? Nothing off the top. Okay, what we need to do is tell it how we want it to be clipped, and we want it to be clipped by putting a border radius and we want the border radius to be circular. And because we know our whole image has a 60 width and height, the radius is half the diameter, and so the radius is 30. And that will give us a round image. Okay, so that's the first part done. The second part is the border. Well, what we can do is we can come and we can put in the background color to our container, and the color we want is white, but that isn't quite what we want. That's still square. So although we have clipped with the round rectangle the picture, we haven't done the same for the container. And we could do the same by putting a round rectangle around the container as well, clipping it, or we can do something called decoration, and they put a box decoration onto the image, onto the container, and one of the box decoration has something called shape, and we can put a box shape circle. What has that done? Well, actually, if I save this, we will get an error, and the error is going to be that you can't have a decoration and a color. It doesn't work. What you can do though is you can set the color within the decoration. So if we put colors white into the box decoration and take it out of the container, then it will come and work again. But where is the white gone? Well, we have a container that is 60 by 60 wide, and we also have an image that is 60 by 60 wide. And so although the white is behind it, you can't see it. So what we can do is come back to our container and put a little bit of padding in. And we can do that by putting the same value all around. I'm going to put a value of 2, and there we go, we have our circle around it. Okay, well that's straightforward, we've got that done. Nice. Next we come to the text. Now all of these texts are white, and we have not we could set them all to be white. That would work for us, but there is a quicker way of doing it. Oops, I don't know where that minus has come from in there. Let's get rid of that. There is a quicker way of doing that, and that's because everything in our header, all the texts, let's look at the graphics again, all the texts in the header, not just the profile but also the timer, is white. What we can do is we can come back to our header file here, okay, and we can say that everything in this area is going to be white. So within the, I'm going to put it in within the safe area, or actually we'll do it within the container because the container contains everything. We're going to wrap that with another widget, and the widget is going to be default text style. But what we don't want to do is create a brand new text style. We want to take all the text styles as they exist and just make a little modification. And so what we're going to do is we're going to merge that with the style text style colors.white. And that means all the text, unless we specify otherwise, within the header is going to be white. Save it, and as you can see, that's worked perfectly for us. Okay, so that is all we need to worry about in terms of the profile. It's just a case now of styling the rest of the text to be however we need. Again, there are different ways of doing this. We could theme it all, but for now, to keep things simple and so we can clearly see what's going on, I'm just going to apply a text style to each of the elements within it. Okay, so the font for the name, we're going to want the weight of the font to be font weight bold. Okay, and let's save this as we go along, and you can see the changes as they happen. It seems to me the letters are a little bit spaced out, so I'm going to put in letter spacing of 1.5. Let's see how that looks. Okay, and it needs to be bigger for sure, so we're going to do a font size of 18. Yeah, I'm happy with that. For the company name, well, actually I think I'm quite happy with it as it exists. It looks, if we look at our design, it's not a million miles away, so I'm going to leave that. And so the only thing to do is a little bit of changing the email, because it's again, if you look at the design, it's just a little bit grayer, it's faded out a little bit. And so we can do that by putting in a style, text style, and we're going to change the color of this one, so we're overriding that color as we did, to colors white, and I'm going to put white 70, which is a grey, and that looks fabulous. Okay, so that is our header almost done. Now there's still a few issues, and one of those issues is everything's centered and it's not centered in our design, but that's an easy enough thing to fix. All we need to do is come to our column, and within our column we have something. We have the main axis, which is, because this is a column, the main axis is up and down, and the cross axis is left and right. And so we can change the alignment of the cross axis to start. So by default it's center, and we've got start, end, stretch, various other things, but we're going to go to start because we want it to be at the start of the line. And if we save that, as you can see, that's come across and it's all in line, but it's not quite in the right place yet. Okay, we'll have to figure out why that is in a moment, but before we do that, what we do need to do is come and put a bit of spacing between the profile picture and the name. They're a bit too close together. So if we find our profile picture, which is this container, and then we've got our name, and in between the two we're just going to put a sized box with a height of, let's say, 10, and that puts the spacing in just like that. Okay, so let's go and figure out why the text is centered, why it's all centered. And if we come up to our header, we can see that we have a column that we've put in, which has our profile and our timer, and we haven't specified the alignment for this column. And this column is going to be, again, we will need to put in our cross-axis alignment, start, and that should move everything over. Okay, so far so good. I think everything is looking all right there. Now we're going to need to put a bit more padding around the edge. We need a bigger gap. Again, if we look at our design, one of the issues we've got here, which means we're going to have to be careful about where we put it. Let me turn all these lines off so you can see. is the line here for the profile is not the same for the timer. The gap here is smaller than the gap here, so we can't put the same padding all the way round the header. We've got to treat the two bits separately. So the easiest way to do that is within the profile. We have already put a bit of padding, and we just need to change that up a little bit and put in something a little bit more. Let's try changing that to maybe 20. What does that look like? Yeah, I think that doesn't look too dissimilar to our design, so we'll go with that. Okay, well, that was fairly painless. We now need to work on the timer. So again, I'm just going to put this within a container, and I'm going to again create or extract the widget, and I am going to call this the timer widget, and that sends it off like that. And again, it's going to be part of the sidebar, so we're going to create a new file which we're going to call timer.dart, and we're going to take from the header the timer, put it into the timer.dart, import our material, save that, come back to our header, import our timer like that. Maybe timer is a bad name, actually. I've just realized that there's other things called timers within Dart, and we might be having to use it. So what we're going to do, and this again, I've saved it, makes things easier. I'm going to call this the app timer. So I'm going to put my mouse or cursor over it, hit F2, and I'm going to call it, in fact, I'm going to call it the header timer. And Dart will just take, or Visual Studio Code will take a few seconds, and it renames it there, and it will also have renamed it for me within the header. Okay, so I'm just going to restart everything to make sure we're all good, and we've got our timer ready to go. Let's take a look at it again, and let's see how this is broken down. We can have a look at our timer layout here. So this time we haven't got a column, but we've got a row of things, and the row contains a button, and it row also contains a column. So we've got a button first and then a column, and within that column we've got this bit of text and the time. Okay, so that's what we're going to have to focus on. Let's take a look at that. So it's no good having this container at the moment. Yes, actually we can have the container, because the container, we're going to need to set a new color. And that brings us on to another point, is we need to now look at the different colors, because the color of the background of this is different to the main app. Let's just take the photo. Yeah, so we've got a darker blue and a lighter blue. So we need to define those colors, and because they're going to be used in a number of different places, I've created a new folder in our lib folder called config, and I've put in a colors.dart file, which is a class of app colors. Now you'll have to excuse the fact I've just put a U in there and not in colors. I'm British, so we spell colour with a U. There you go. So these are the colours: static constant colour blue, dark blue and grey, and these are the colours that I've taken from the design. Now if you're used to web development, you'll be used to these sort of colours, these numbers. That might make more sense. Okay, so that is a hexadecimal color code, and for here we've just added the double F before the 0 is specifying its hexadecimal. FF is the alpha value for the color. So these are all solid colors, they're non-transparent, and they're the color values. So if you just want to copy those down, if you want to use the same colors, pause for a second and save that. And then if we come across to our header where we've got set the color to blue, we can change that to app colors blue, and now the app is in the correct color. Okay, so back to our timer, and this container, we want it to be the color, we want it to be the app colors dot dark blue. And that's fabulous. We've got that going just as we need. Okay, so let's work on this a little bit more. I'm going to put a comma at the end, which will basically force all this to be formatted in a better way. We're going to set the width of this to be double infinity. Now this time the double infinity is going to take the whole of the screen, but it's actually only taking the whole of the area it has available to it. And so because we want some edging, we don't want it going right to the edge, we're going to wrap this whole thing with a padding, and we're going to leave it at 8. That's going to put an 8 padding around everything, and I think if we look at our design, that's not too far off. Yep, I'm happy with that. Okay, so we have that, but we do need a height for this container because we want it to be a fixed height, and I've chosen 80, and that seems to be about right. That looks good. Now the container itself is going to, we'll take out the child, as we looked at the design, is going to have a row, and the first item in the row is going to be the button, and so we can do that by putting a icon, and at the moment I'm just going to put an icon, and the icon is going to be pause, and that will give us the pause button just like that. Okay, now the pause button itself, again looking at the design, is in a different colored box, so we're going to need to deal with that, and the way I'm going to deal with that is by extracting the icon to another widget called pause button. And I'm going to, for now, I'm actually going to leave this in the same file. I don't think we need to extract this to another file. It's not used anywhere else other than here. But we are going to wrap this icon itself within a container. Okay, and the container is going to have a fixed height and width of 70. Now, where did we come up with those numbers from? Well, if you look above, our whole timer has got a height of 70, and I'm going to put in a padding around it of 5 pixels. This top bit here, hang on, this top bit here, that and that and that are all 5 pixels. So when you add the 2 5s up, we've got 10, and that's where the 10 less than the 80 comes from, the 70. Okay, so we've got our 70 overlay there. We've got our icon. The size of the icon isn't right, so let's set the size to 40. Let's have a look at that. That's a bit big. Let's try 40, as I said. And the color, it needs to be colors.white. Okay, all good except for the background color. And again, we're going to put in a color, and we've already got our color. It's our app color blue, and bingo, we're getting there. Okay, now as you can see, it's not quite right yet. It's butted up right to the edge. So if we come up to our code and in our row, or in the container, sorry, in a container for our timer block, we're going to put some padding in there, and it's going to be edge insets all 5. That's what we've said it's going to be, and this is going to be a constant padding, it's not going to change. And that's put our border in there. Lovely. Still got a problem though. In our design it's all rounded, and at the moment it's all very square. So again, we done this already. We've rounded something into a circle, the profile picture before. This time we're going to put in a box decoration, and the box decoration isn't going to be quite as pronounced as before. We're going to put in a border radius circular of 6. And if you remember from before, we can't have that and a color, so I'm just going to move the color from the container into the box decoration, and that puts on a nice border. That works out okay. We might need to make it a little bit different. We'll fiddle around with this in a second, because we're going to need to do the same. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the decoration, and I'm going to copy it into the pause button, changing the color to blue rather than the dark blue. But if you look at it, I think that's too much now, so we're going to have to put this down, and this is a little bit fiddly. 4, maybe 4. I'm going to go with 4. I think I'm happy with that. That looks fine. Okay, so that's our pause button taken care of. The other part we need to take care of is this now column that's going to have to go in there. So after the pause button, let's put in our column, and within the column we're going to have some children elements or widgets, and we're going to have, first of all, a text which says clock started at 9:01 AM. Just copying it off the design, and then we're going to have another text, not in capitals, which says 01/24/17. Okay, let's take a look at that. Looking good. That's not too bad. Now, again, looking at our design, the time itself is a lot bigger, so we're going to need to put some text styling into our time. So let's do that. Style, text style, and here we're going to make it really quite big. We're going to put font size 55 and font weight 200, W200. And where does that W200 come from? Well, again, if we go back to our pubspec.yaml, you can see that our extra light font has a weight of 200. So because that's been set, because I've set the weight to 200, it's using this font here. If I set the weight to 300, it would just be the light font, and if I set it to 500, it'll be medium. Okay, so that's where that 200 had come from. But now you can see we've got this problem, bottom overflow by 33 pixels. That's because our text is now, we've created a fixed height of 80 for our timer, and this is now overflowing it. It's 33 pixels too many. but there's also this big gap here, and that can be quite annoying. We can get rid of that by putting a height for the text of 1, and that removes that big border. And there's quite a lot to that, and if you click on it, it explains where all that comes from. I'm not going to go into all that, but essentially it helps with the calculation, but we're still overflowing by 6 pixels, and we're not actually. It's just that the box, the text box itself, is. And one way we can fix that is by putting it, wrapping the whole text inside an expanded, and this is a widget that expands a child or row, column, so the child fits the available space. But if we do that, that basically helps the system understand that it's not there. If we took out that height or changed the font to, I don't know, 555, it doesn't overflow to the bottom anymore. It overflows to the right because we're not dealing with that, but it doesn't overflow to the bottom. Yeah, but it does clip it off completely. But because we know that this is a fixed height and the font is right, that's going to work for us for now. This may have issues with people with zoomed fonts and zoomed text, but we can deal with that another time. Okay, I think we want to put a little bit of spacing between the clocks started, so we're going to put a sized box here, and we're going to put a height of 5. That pushes that down a little bit, and we also need, between the pause button and the column, we need to put a sized box again, and this time we're going to put a width of 10, and that will just put a little bit of a space between the two. And that, folks, is the header part done. I think I'm happy with that. Obviously there's no functionality to it. We're not doing the functionality yet. We'll come back to that another time. Right, so now we're going to go and look at the menu. So we have, back in our main, at the moment we've got text menu. I'm going to close these other things down. And again, we're going to put what we've got, if we look at the design, is 4 items, four menu items, which are all rows in a column. Okay, so we might as well build our column immediately. And the column is going to have children, and the children are going to be menu item 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, it doesn't quite look right, but again, we're going to extract this column into a widget, and we're going to call this app menu. And again, we're going to create a new file for this. So I'm going to call this menu.dart, and I'm going to take out the app menu from the main file, put it into our menu.dart, and import material. Get rid of that extra space at the top, and then in the main Dart, import app menu into that. Just give it a full restart to make sure everything's fine, which it should be, and we're good to go. Okay, so what do we want our menu item to look like? Let's take rid of all that. That's just an example. So we've got a row because we've got 2 items in there. The first icon is the first item, sorry, is an icon, and the icon for the very first one, if we look at it, it's my profile. And so what we can do is we can put an icons, and I think this is called a count circular outlined, count circular rounded. That's what we want. Okay, let's save that. That looks about right as an icon. The size doesn't look right. We're going to set that to a size of 30, and we're going to set the color to the grey that we've got set up in our color file, and that looks to be about right. The second thing we're going to want is text, and the text, let's have a look, is my profile. Not capitals. So we put text. That looks okay. We need to change the font style, so we can change the style, text style, font, sorry, not the style, the size to 18. Let's try that. That looks okay. Now we need to put a bit of padding around the icon, I think, because it's not quite right and we want some spacing. So if we come to the icon and wrap that with padding, that's put some around it, but I want the horizontal and vertical padding to be different. So instead of all, we're going to change that to symmetric, and that will take in two arguments. We're going to have vertical, we're going to put 15 on the vertical and 30 on the horizontal, and that sets that up nicely. Okay, so this whole row is our item and we've got 4 of them. So what we could do is copy this 4 times and place it 4 times. But it means that if we change anything, like if we want to change the size of the icon or the padding, we're going to have to do that 4 times every time. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to take the row and we're going to extract that to its own widget, and we're going to call this menu item. And this is where we're going to start doing a bit of coding now rather than just the design. So by itself that does nothing, and if we take our menu item and copy it 4 times, we get 4 copies of the same menu. Not what we want, because they all need to do different things. So what do we want to change? Well, there's 2 things we're going to change. The icon, okay, and if we hover over that we can see that it's the icon, and the text. So what we can do is up here at the top, and this is new, at the top of this stateless widget we can say, well, we're going to take, and it's going to be final because it's stateless, it means it doesn't change, we're going to take something which is a string, and it's going to be the text of the menu. We're also going to take something called icon data, and that's going to be the icon. Now we've got an error saying that all final fields must be initialized, but icon and text aren't. And that's because we must tell this widget what those are. There's a couple of ways of doing that. We can set them here, but we want them all to be different, so we need to set it from outside. So to do that, we're going to refactor and add the final formal parameters, this text and this icon, but again they're underlined, and that's because they can be null, they can be left blank, and if they're left blank we're going to end up with problems. We could put a question mark in front of it which would make it optional, but these aren't optional, these are required because we need them all. We need them all to be there all the time. Okay, so what has that done? Well, that's created errors up here, and the reason it's created errors, and I'll just delete 3 of them for now, is because we're not passing those parameters to it. We need to pass the text to it. My profile, and we need to pass the icon to it, which is going to be the icons account circular out rounded, that one. And now if we copy that 4 times, the errors are gone. Great. So all we need to do is change these to the design. So account settings, timesheet, and log out. And change the icon to settings. I couldn't find a similar icon, so I picked this one, date range, except it's an underscore, and icons log out. So if I save that, is it going to work? Well, the answer is no. And the reason it's not going to work is although we're passing this data into our menu item, we're not using it. We've still got the text here saying my profile, and we don't want it to be my profile. We want it to be whatever we passed in, the text. So text, and the icon also needs to be the icon we passed in. Now when we save it, bingo, our menu is done. And that, folks, is where we're going to draw it to a close for this session. If we take a look at our design, I think we got pretty close. I think I'm quite happy with that at the moment. The one thing we haven't done, and let's do it very quickly, is set the color of our app bar at the top. And we can do that by coming into our main file, and before we run the app, we can call this command, which is system Chrome set system UI overlay style. Okay, so we're changing the system overlay style. We need to pass into it, no, not that. We need to pass into it a system UI overlay style. There's a couple of default ones, dark and light, but we want to pass in our own custom one, and we want the status bar color to be, and I think let's try our app colors dark blue. Let's see if that works for us. Now we're going to have to restart the app for this to take place, and I will just stop the app and run it again. And there you go, folks. I also missed the semicolon off the end of that line. That helps as well. But I think that looks as close as we're going to get it to the design. In the next episode, we will look at putting the stuff in the background and making this into the overlay that it is, that slides in and out. And we will do that before we then start looking at how we're going to code the app, because at the end of it, it is going to be a functional app that does what we expect it to do. We're not just doing the design of it, we're going to make it work. So if you've enjoyed, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to follow for more content, and we'll see you next time. All right, take care now. Bye bye.